Prosecutors statewide say a recent ruling by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals could lead to the release of child predators. Last week, the court decided the criminal charge of online solicitation of a minor was unconstitutional. That means someone who talks dirty to a child online without actually asking for sex is protected by free speech. One local prosecutor says he believes the ruling will be upheld and that the legislature needs to craft a new law. So was the court decision to uphold free speech right, or was it wrong? That's what we're talking about this half hour, and we want to know what you think. Share your thoughts on Facebook and Twitter with us. Now, in our newsroom again is Fox 26 legal analyst Chris Tritico, news analyst Mustafa Tamiz, and public policy analyst Jackie Bally. Good morning again, you guys.
Morning.
All right, what do you think about this? So many people are absolutely shocked about this.
Well, before we get into that, I've got to acknowledge that Jackie finally jumped on the Sam Houston State University bandwagon with me when we won again yesterday.
I'm just upset that I didn't get the memo. You guys look fantastic.
The Battle of the Piney Woods, Sam Houston victorious again. Okay.
She was dressed for Halloween.
Listen, this is going to be very controversial, but the law in Texas says that an adult cannot solicit sex on a minor online, which is, if you look at that, that's a very good law. But what was happening was adults were getting arrested, charged, and convicted for discussing sex with minors online when they had never actually asked to have sex with that minor or asked for a meeting. That's what the court said in what I think is, in a purely First Amendment analysis, the court is absolutely right that if you're just talking about sex, that talk is protected by the First Amendment. But once you cross over that line and ask for a meeting or specifically ask for sex, then you're subject to being arrested and subject to being prosecuted for this law. Jackie Bally, from a First Amendment standpoint, I think that the court was right.
It's a literal interpretation of the First Amendment. However, as a mother of two teenage boys, of course I think it's a bad decision. And when they were talking about their ruling, they compared it to a lot of things that we read in Shakespeare and a lot of our literature that we have in our school system, and that's lacking common sense. And I think of course, as a mother, we have to be very vigilant. We have to make sure we know what our teenagers and our young men and women are looking at online and who they're talking to. I mean, that's our job as parents. However, I do think there should be some responsibility on adults, with adults, who are going to these younger people who are talking explicitly about sex. And I think this is a very horrible ruling. It's a bad ruling, even if it is a literal interpretation of the First Amendment.
Is that correct? I mean, should the court look beyond the literal interpretation of the Constitution?
You know, Texas judges are elected, and we'll get to elect a lot of Texas judges next year. And when voters go to the poll, I want them to remember three things. That the Texas judges, Republican judges, wanted to restrict women's right in terms of choice. They want to eliminate them from getting birth control, but they want, white men to, talk to little boys over the internet and sex text. I mean, you have to just think about, this is where our courts have headed, and next in 2014, voters will have a choice to go down to the court and vote out all the Republican judges.
Well, see, I don't think this is a Republican or a Democratic issue. It's a constitutional issue. And if you're going to do the job you were elected to do, whether you're Republican or a Democrat, this law, the way that they crafted this decision, is absolutely correct under the First Amendment.
And for the most part, we have very good judges in Texas. We really do. Our judges are pretty good. So my statements are coming from the fact that I'm a mother of two teenagers,
right,
and I'm not happy with the ruling.
I know, Jackie, I am right there with you. What adult has the constitutional right to talk dirty to a child online? And my Facebook friends absolutely agree with me. Okay, Arnetta Hicks Murray says, shut the front door. That's plain sick. She says, why would an adult even want to talk dirty to a child? Joe Harris says, this just opened a new door for sickos. Marsha Kushner says this is a deplorable decision which will allow pedophiles to legally prey on children. Ed Rio says, I like his comment. He says, well, then post their names and email addresses online and they might get their own predators.
I don't disagree with all of that logic. I really don't. But when you're looking at it from a constitutional standpoint, you have to look at the law the way the law was intended. And the law was intended to stop predators from picking up children and having sex with them. but the First Amendment overtakes that if you're just having talk, and that's what we're talking about. And let me just make this point because I want you to comment on this. This is the same Court of Criminal Appeals that said it's okay for a lawyer to sleep during a capital murder trial. That's not ineffective assistance of counsel. It's the same court that said drug offenses, we're not going to look at drug offenses that are racially based, and then they make this stunning ruling on the First Amendment. I think they were clearly following the Constitution.
No, this is a very conservative, very literal interpretation of the Constitution, and that's why I'm saying that it's a very conservative viewpoint. And when voters go to the polls next November, they have a choice: do they want this kind of judicial conduct or not?
Well, to take one ruling and say, let's outvote all Republican judges because of one ruling, that's crazy. But I do think this particular ruling will be overturned. I think it will be looked at. I think people will continue to challenge and question it because it's lacking common sense.
Who's going to overturn it?
Well, I think they're going to probably go back to the legislature. Remember, we were talking about earlier, and then the legislature, they want the legislature to pass a bill that is equivalent to what they're saying. I think the opposite will happen. I think the legislature will look at what they've done and pass another bill to challenge what they just said.
But if the legislature passes a bill that says adults can't talk to children about sex, this case
I don't think
there.
our legislature will do that. That's my point.
Okay. And so what do you think the legislature is going to do?
I think the legislature will look at what they're saying and then probably craft something saying the opposite of what these judges just said.
Vote them out.
All right, you guys, this is my favorite Facebook page post. Avonda Price Bram says, quote, "Oh, heck no." And I love it. Thanks so much, you guys.
All right.
And we'll see you in the next half hour for your election predictions. Can't wait to hear them.